The gavel strikes once. The sound echoes through the silent chamber like a warning shot. Cameras flash, the air hums with tension. And somewhere in the back row, someone whispers, "This is it." Judge Richard Leon's expression is unreadable. Sharp eyes behind thin glasses scanning the courtroom as though trying to predict the storm about to break. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sits still, her hands folded neatly on the desk, her face calm but her eyes focused, burning. Moments ago, the prosecution had delivered what they called the undeniable evidence. Their tone dripped with arrogance, their words calculated to humiliate. They believed they had cornered her, that this young congresswoman, this woman who'd risen from the streets of Dallas to the marble halls of Washington, would buckle under pressure. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The courtroom feels like a powder keg. The audience leans forward. Journalists grip their pens tighter. Judge Leon clears his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. "Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed with your defense." There's a heartbeat of silence. Then Jasmine stands. Every camera locks onto her like heat-seeking missiles. She adjusts her jacket, glances once toward the opposing counsel, and says quietly, but clearly enough for every microphone to catch it, "When truth is on trial, silence is complicity." So today I refuse to be silent. A ripple moves through the room. Someone gasps. Someone else murmurs, "Did she just say that?" The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably, a thin smile flickering across his lips. But it's not confidence. It's fear wearing a mask. Jasmine begins to walk slowly toward the evidence board, each step measured, deliberate. Her voice, calm but cutting, fills the courtroom. "They've shown you fragments of truth," she says, "pieces that fit their story. But let me show you the whole picture, the one they didn't want you to see." Judge Leon's brow tightens. The audience can feel it, the energy shifting. What began as a routine hearing is transforming into something else entirely, something electric. And as Jasmine turns back to the bench, the lights catch her eyes, fierce and unblinking. She says, "Your Honor, what happens next will explain everything." The room falls silent. Even the air seems to hold its breath. Long before the courtroom lights and the flashing cameras, the battle had already begun, quietly behind closed doors, in the corridors of power where influence whispers louder than justice ever shouts. What was unfolding now wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a reflection of a deeper struggle in America itself. A struggle over who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who decides what truth sounds like. For weeks, headlines had turned Jasmine Crockett into a symbol. Some called her too bold, too emotional, too loud. Others saw her as something else entirely, a mirror, a reminder that the new generation of leadership, diverse, unflinching, unapologetically American, would no longer play by the rules written for their silence. Judge Richard Leon understood the magnitude of this moment, even if he didn't say it aloud. He had seen political theater before, but this was different. The nation was watching. Every word, every pause, every raised eyebrow would ripple across screens, across living rooms, across timelines. This was no longer about evidence. It was about endurance, about who could hold their ground when the entire system tilted against them. The prosecution's case had been built on perception, sound bites, half-truths, carefully edited clips that painted Jasmine as reckless. They believed they could define her before she could define herself. But beneath the calm of her courtroom presence there was history. Decades of voices that had been dismissed, discredited, or drowned out. She carried those voices with her, invisible but weighty, like armor forged from struggle. Her team had warned her, "They'll come for your character, not your case." They were right. In every headline and every pundit's smirk, there was a quiet contempt for her audacity to rise, to speak with the confidence of someone who belonged. But Jasmine never measured her worth by their approval. She measured it by her people, the single mothers who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, the young girls who saw in her the possibility of being more than what the world expected. Now, as she stood before Judge Leon, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every person who had ever been told to wait their turn. Her voice carried the rhythm of those who had fought for seats at tables that were never meant for them. Her very presence challenged a history written by others. The cameras zoomed closer. The prosecutor flipped nervously through his notes. Somewhere outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered, waving handmade signs that read, "Truth has no fear." Inside, the silence grew heavier. Expectant, Jasmine looked up, her voice steady. The words deliberate. "Your Honor, this case isn't about a mistake. It's about a message. A message that says, standing up for what's right should never come with a price tag, or a target on your back." The judge studied her for a moment. Behind the bench, his face betrayed nothing but his eyes. They flickered with something rare. Respect, perhaps, or the realization that history was unfolding right in front of him. In that instant, the courtroom ceased to be a stage. It became a battleground for America's conscience. The tension wasn't just about verdicts or statutes. It was about who we choose to believe and what kind of country we decide to be. And as Jasmine stepped back to her table, the weight of her words hanging in the air like smoke after a spark, no one dared to move. Long before his name echoed through the marble halls of the courthouse, Thomas Greer had already mastered the art of control. To the public, he was the face of composure, a veteran prosecutor with an immaculate record, the kind of man who quoted the Constitution like scripture and smiled for cameras like a preacher before his flock. But those who worked beneath him knew better. Behind that calm, fatherly tone lived a man obsessed with dominance, with the quiet thrill of bending truth just enough to make it his own. Greer's rise was no accident. He'd built his career not on justice, but on timing, knowing when to strike, when to smile, and when to destroy. He learned early that power wasn't about who was right. It was about who could make others believe they were. And for years, the system rewarded him for it. Judges trusted him. Juries admired him. Politicians shook his hand and whispered promises he never intended to keep. He had a talent for framing narratives that fit perfectly into America's appetite for outrage. Every case became a stage. Every opponent became a caricature. And when Jasmine Crockett entered his orbit, he saw not a person, but a threat to his order. A young black woman who spoke with conviction, challenged authority, and refused to bow. To Greer, that wasn't courage. It was insolence. In private, he'd once told a colleague, "People like her make noise. My job is to remind them who's in charge." The colleague laughed uneasily, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Over the years, Greer had built a network. Donors, insiders, journalists who owed him favors. When he wanted a story buried, it disappeared. When he needed a narrative pushed, it appeared on every channel by morning. His methods weren't illegal, just immoral in a way that left no fingerprints. And that's what made him dangerous. His office walls were lined with framed headlines of his victories, each one a trophy. Each one a story where someone else's downfall cemented his reputation. But behind the prestige was fear. Fear that his legacy would one day be questioned. That the power he'd built on image might crumble under truth. When the case against Jasmine landed on his desk, he saw an opportunity. Not just to win, but to remind the world that he still owned the room. Her rise, her speeches, her growing popularity among young voters, it irritated him. She spoke of justice, transparency, inclusion, words he once used to build his own career but no longer believed in. To him, her authenticity was dangerous because it couldn't be controlled. So he crafted a plan. Leak selective documents, twist a timeline, seed doubt, frame the narrative before she even had a chance to respond. To the public, it would look like a fair inquiry. In reality, it was character assassination, wearing the mask of due process. As the hearings began, Greer carried himself like a man untouchable. The press called him the unflappable prosecutor. He thrived on the tension, savoring the gasps, the camera flashes, the theater of it all. He had no intention of letting this young congresswoman steal his spotlight. Yet beneath the arrogance, small cracks had begun to form. His aides whispered about inconsistencies in the evidence. One junior clerk, uneasy about the omissions, resigned without explanation. Reporters started asking sharper questions, but Greer dismissed them all. In his mind, he was still the hero, the man cleaning up Washington's chaos, the symbol of order in a noisy, divided country. He told himself the same lie powerful men always do, that he wasn't corrupt, merely necessary, that without him the system would collapse, that his manipulation was mercy, his lies protection. But history doesn't favor men who confuse control with virtue. And as Jasmine prepared to speak, Greer's composure began to waver. He watched her calm defiance, the unshaken tone in her voice, the steady way she dismantled each accusation, and something inside him shifted, an unease he couldn't name. The same cameras that once made him a star now seemed to record his discomfort. The same murmurs that used to affirm his power now questioned his intent. For the first time in his career, Thomas Greer felt the room slipping away from him. He straightened his tie, leaned back in his chair, and forced a smile for the gallery. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just another case. This was the beginning of his unraveling. Before she ever stood beneath the glare of courtroom lights, before the microphones and the cameras and the weight of expectation, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl from South Dallas who learned early that silence never saved anyone. Her mother worked nights as a nurse. Her father fixed cars in a one-room garage behind their home. The sound of tools clinking against metal was her childhood soundtrack. A rhythm of persistence, a reminder that dignity isn't something given, something built. Her parents never had much, but they had conviction. "We don't bow," her father used to tell her. "Even when they make you kneel, you find a way to rise." Those words would stay with her, echoing through every room she'd ever walk into where she wasn't meant to belong. In school, she was the student teachers underestimated, too outspoken, too emotional. When she questioned a history textbook that softened the brutality of slavery, her teacher called her disruptive. When she defended a classmate facing suspension for something he didn't do, the principal told her she should learn her place. Each moment lit a fire inside her, the kind that doesn't burn out, it hardens into purpose. By the time Jasmine reached college, she wasn't just driven. She was relentless. She studied political science by day and worked at a diner by night. Every plate she served, every table she cleared was a silent promise to herself. "I will not waste this chance." But it wasn't ambition that drove her. It was justice. She had seen too many people like her. Bright, talented, but shut out of rooms where decisions were made. Law school wasn't glamorous for her. It was survival. She studied under flickering lights, in borrowed clothes, using second-hand books with half the pages marked by someone else's dreams. When others networked at wine receptions, she volunteered at community legal clinics, defending tenants from eviction and mothers from losing custody over unpaid fines. The law, to her, wasn't an abstract set of codes. It was a weapon that too often belonged to the powerful. She was determined to learn how to wield it for the powerless. Her reputation grew, fiery, principled, uncompromising. She didn't speak to impress. She spoke to expose. And people noticed. After law school, she opened a small practice in her old neighborhood. Clients couldn't always pay, but they came because she listened. She fought cases most lawyers turned away. Immigrants threatened with deportation. Veterans denied benefits. Women trapped in legal limbo. She didn't win every time, but every fight left a mark. Then came the day that changed everything. A young man, wrongfully accused of assault, came to her office trembling. The evidence was flimsy, but the system had already decided his guilt. Jasmine worked day and night, piecing together the truth from fragments. In court, her cross-examination dismantled the prosecution's story so completely that the judge dismissed the case mid-trial. Reporters called it a miracle defense, but for Jasmine, it was a revelation. The truth could win, but only if someone was brave enough to speak it. Even when the cost was high, that case put her on the map. Invitations came. Interviews, panels, political organizations eager to harness her voice. But fame never interested her. Power did, not power for its own sake, but the kind that shifts the ground beneath injustice. When she ran for Congress, pundits called her a long shot. She ran anyway. Her campaign was built on doorsteps, handshakes, and kitchen table promises. She didn't have corporate donors. She had people. Teachers, nurses, single fathers, and young dreamers who saw in her a reflection of themselves. When she won, it wasn't just an election, it was vindication. The same streets that once told her stay quiet now echoed with chants of her name. But with victory came resistance. Old power doesn't go quietly. Every time she stood for reform, police accountability, housing rights, equity in education, the backlash grew. Critics called her divisive. Commentators mocked her tone, And Thomas Greer? He watched her rise with a tightening jaw, already plotting her fall. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd been underestimated her whole life. This was nothing new. Every insult, every smear, every whisper campaign only reminded her of why she started. She wasn't fighting for applause. She was fighting for the millions who couldn't afford to. Now, as she stands in Judge Leon's courtroom, the journey that began in a modest home in South Dallas has led her to the heart of a battle that feels both personal and historic. She knows the stakes aren't just her reputation. They're about every person watching who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter. She takes a slow breath, steadying herself. Around her, the murmurs fade. The lights seem to dim. She's no longer the girl who questioned her teacher, or the law student reading by candlelight. She's the woman ready to confront a system built to break her, and to prove that it no longer can. The defense table gleams under the fluorescent light. Jasmine places her hand flat against it, the way her father once placed his on the hood of an old car. Steady, certain, unshakable. She looks toward Greer, the man who represents everything she spent her life challenging. And in that quiet, heavy moment she knows. This isn't just her fight, it's every fight that came before her. The air was sharp with anticipation. Every camera in the courtroom pointed toward the defense table as Jasmine rose, her posture straight, her expression calm. Across from her, Thomas Greer leaned back in his chair, hands clasped like a man certain of his victory. The distance between them was more than physical. It was the divide between two worlds, two Americas colliding under the sterile glow of courtroom light. "Congresswoman Crockett," Greer began, his voice dripping with polite condescension, "you've made quite a statement here today. But rhetoric doesn't replace evidence. Perhaps you'd like to show us where in this file," he lifted a folder with theatrical precision, "you find anything that clears your name." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Mr. Greer," she said evenly, "I find it interesting that you call this my name. Because what you're attacking here isn't me. It's everyone who refuses to fit your story of who belongs in power." A low murmur rippled through the room. Judge Leon's gavel struck once, a warning to keep order. But the energy had already shifted. Greer's smirk tightened. He spread the papers across the table like a dealer revealing his cards. "These are facts, Congresswoman. Not narratives, not feelings. Facts." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice rising just enough to carry, not to shout. "Facts can be manipulated when told by the wrong storyteller. You've cut pieces from conversations, removed dates, taken words out of context, and you call that justice?" Greer hesitated just a flicker, but Jasmine caught it. She pressed on. "You've built a career on distortion. You don't seek truth. You manufacture it. You think power makes your story the only one that matters. But tell me, Mr. Greer, what happens when truth starts talking back?" A gasp rippled through the audience. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. He flipped another page, eyes darting to his notes. "You're emotional, Congresswoman. You're making this about yourself." She smiled faintly. "Of course I am. Because for people like me, the personal is political. You built this system to keep people like me out, and now you're shocked that I'm standing in it, telling the truth you hoped no one would hear." Judge Leon's expression remained neutral, but his eyes followed every move, every word. It wasn't just a defense anymore, it was a reckoning. Greer leaned forward, voice sharpened. "This isn't a protest rally, Ms. Crockett. This is a court of law. Your defiance doesn't intimidate me." Jasmine met his gaze without blinking. "It's not meant to. It's meant to remind you that fear and control only work when people stop speaking. I'm not afraid of losing my career, Mr. Greer. I'm afraid of losing the country I believe in." The line landed like a punch. Someone in the audience whispered, "She's winning this." Cameras zoomed in. Greer's fingers twitched against the table, small, involuntary, betraying the strain beneath his polished demeanor. He laughed softly, but it rang hollow. "Idealism doesn't win cases, Congresswoman. Evidence does." Jasmine tilted her head. "Then let's talk evidence. Like the emails your office forgot to disclose. The recordings you edited before submission. The timeline that somehow skips 3 crucial days." The color drained slightly from Greer's face. "Objection, irrelevant," he barked, turning to the judge. Judge Leon paused, eyes narrowing. "Overruled. Proceed." Jasmine's tone softened, almost gentle, but her words cut sharper than ever. You see, Mr. Greer, justice isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can stand the longest in the truth. Right now, your truth is unraveling. For a moment, the courtroom fell utterly still. The prosecutor's pen dropped from his hand. His mask of confidence cracked just enough for everyone to see it. She turned toward the bench, her voice steady. Your Honor, I stand here not just to defend myself, but to defend the idea that truth still matters in this country. That integrity isn't a liability, it's a legacy. Judge Leon nodded slightly, as if acknowledging more than the words. The air trembled with the sense that something irreversible had begun. Across the aisle, Greer exhaled sharply, his eyes darting toward the cameras as if searching for a way to rewrite what had just happened. But the story was no longer his to tell. The balance of power had shifted, and as Jasmine returned to her seat, the silence that followed was not relief. It was the breath before a storm. The air inside the courtroom had changed. You could feel it. The kind of tension that doesn't come from fear, but from expectation. Everyone sensed that something was about to happen. Something that would turn this trial from a spectacle into a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding. Across from her, Thomas Greer stared down at his papers, pretending to read, though everyone knew he was only trying to avoid her gaze. Your Honor, Jasmine began, her tone calm but resonant. With the court's permission, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence. Greer's head snapped up. Objection, he said quickly. This material hasn't been entered into discovery. Judge Leon looked at him with measured patience. Let's hear what the Congresswoman has to say. Proceed. Jasmine walked to the evidence screen at the center of the room. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown. The projection flickered to life. A series of documents, email chains, timestamps. The room leaned in. These, she said, pointing to the first thread, are internal communications from Mr. Greer's office, sent to multiple media outlets 2 weeks before this hearing began. In them, you'll find the very allegations used to tarnish my name, months before an official investigation was even opened. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The gallery whispered. Reporters began scribbling furiously. Greer's voice wavered just slightly. You can't prove those came from my office. Jasmine turned to him, her eyes steady. Can't I? She clicked again. Another slide appeared, this one bearing the letterhead of the Department of Prosecution, and beneath it the signature Thomas A. Greer. The silence that followed was deafening. Greer's face drained of color. That those were drafts. They were never meant to be seen. Jasmine cut in, her tone still controlled, almost surgical. Never meant to reveal that you planted a narrative before the truth had a chance to breathe. Judge Leon's gavel struck. Order. But order was impossible now. The courtroom was alive with whispers and flashes of light. Jasmine waited. She didn't rush. She let the truth do what truth does best, stand still and demand to be seen. Then she spoke again, softer now, but every syllable carried weight. I was raised to believe that justice is blind, that it doesn't see color, gender, or power. But Mr. Greer, justice isn't blind, it's been blinded. Blinded by men like you who decide who deserves fairness and who doesn't. You told this court that I made this personal. You're right, because when the law becomes a weapon, personal is all that's left. The audience erupted, gasps, murmurs. A few claps that quickly turned into a wave before the gavel slammed again. Greer shot to his feet. This is an outrage. You're grandstanding. His voice cracked under its own fury. Jasmine didn't move. You call it grandstanding. I call it surviving. She turned back toward the judge. Your Honor, I stand accused of misconduct. Yet the only misconduct we've seen today belongs to the man who weaponized this court for his ambition. She gestured toward Greer. He used leaks to manipulate perception, twisted truth to inflate his power, and bet on the belief that I'd stay silent. He was wrong, the judge's brow furrowed. He exchanged a look with his clerk. The weight of Jasmine's words hung like thunderclouds over the room. Jasmine walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, her voice lowering to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. I didn't come here to save my name. I came here to save faith. Faith that our system can still choose truth over theatrics. Faith that this country still listens when a woman stands up and says, "Enough." A pause. A heartbeat. She turned toward Greer once more. "You built your empire on silence, Mr. Greer. On the hope that people like me would be too tired, too afraid, or too small to fight back. But look around." She swept her hand toward the crowd. Students, reporters, ordinary citizens who had packed the benches, their eyes wide, their phones recording. They're not afraid anymore. They're watching. They're learning. They're remembering. Greer's composure cracked. His lips trembled as he tried to interject, but no sound came. He reached for his water glass and missed, the glass toppling over, water spilling across his papers. The image, this once untouchable prosecutor fumbling under the weight of his own lies, was poetic. Jasmine stepped forward, her tone shifting, still calm, but now almost compassionate. "You see, truth isn't fragile, Mr. Greer, it's patient. It waits for moments like this to rise." The courtroom fell completely still. Cameras focused on her face. No anger now, only resolve. She took one final breath and said, "So no, I won't apologize for being loud. I won't apologize for defending what's right. Because when history looks back at this day, it won't ask who shouted the loudest. It'll ask who stood their ground when it mattered most." Judge Leon leaned back in his chair, visibly moved. Even he seemed caught between the roles of judge and witness to history. Outside, the murmur of the crowd grew louder, echoing through the walls, a swell of voices chanting her name. Inside, Thomas Greer sat slumped, staring blankly at the soaked mess before him, the confidence gone from his eyes. Jasmine gathered her papers, not rushing, not gloating. The room stayed silent, as if waiting for her to say more. But she didn't. Some truths don't need repetition, they simply resonate. She looked once more toward the bench. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "the defense rests. The gavel didn't fall, not yet." The judge's hand hovered over it, as if even he wasn't ready to break the spell. And then, as Jasmine turned to leave the podium, a voice from the back, someone unseen, called out, "That's what justice sounds like." Applause erupted, spontaneous and unstoppable. Greer didn't look up. The cameras caught it all, the trembling hands, the sweat on his brow, the silent collapse of a man who'd mistaken fear for respect. Jasmine paused near the exit, the crowd's energy washing over her like a tide. For a fleeting moment she closed her eyes, not in triumph but in quiet gratitude, the kind that comes only after a lifetime of fighting to be heard. Outside, sunlight spilled through the tall courthouse windows, striking the floor where she'd stood, bright, unflinching. Deniable. The verdict hadn't even been announced, yet the world outside had already made up its mind. The clip, Jasmine Crockett's fiery, unbroken stare, and the words, "Justice isn't blind, it's been blinded," spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. On phones, on tablets, on televisions playing in barbershops and classrooms. Across continents where people who had never even heard her name were now repeating it. The internet exploded. Hashtags flooded timelines. Crockett vs. corruption. Truth has no fear. Justice awakens. Twitter turned into a battlefield of perspectives. Some praising her courage, others scrambling to defend Greer's shattered legacy. One post from a young law student in Detroit went viral. "Today I saw what real power looks like, and it wasn't behind the bench." Cable news couldn't keep up. By midnight, every major network had turned the trial into a cultural lightning storm. Commentators replayed the moment on loop. The raised hand, the trembling prosecutor, the gavel that never quite fell. On one channel, a conservative analyst tried to downplay it, calling it a masterclass in emotional manipulation. But even as he spoke, the split screen showed Jasmine's clip racking up millions of views, likes ticking upward like a heartbeat. In contrast, a young anchor on a progressive outlet leaned forward, her tone charged. This wasn't just about one woman in a courtroom. This was about every voice that's been told to wait its turn. Tonight, America saw what happens when truth finally gets the microphone. Outside the courthouse, the chants continued long after Jasmine had left. Students, veterans, parents, people from all walks of life gathered with candles and hand-drawn signs. "For the silenced," one read. "For justice, not judgment," read another. The air buzzed with something that felt bigger than protest. It felt like awakening. In cities across the country, murals began to appear overnight. Jasmine's profile painted in bold strokes, her quote scrawled beneath, "Truth isn't fragile. It waits for moments like this to rise." The images spread across social media, turning her into an icon of resilience, a modern Rosa in a tailored blazer. But the shockwaves didn't stop at home. International outlets picked it up. In London, a BBC anchor described the hearing as a turning point for American accountability. In Johannesburg, a talk show called it the day integrity walked into court and refused to leave quietly. Even in places far from American politics, Jasmine's speech had become a rallying cry for reform, a symbol of moral defiance in systems built to suppress it. Back in Washington, Greer's empire began to crumble. His name vanished from official statements. His allies turned silent, and leaked memos hinted that he'd be taking an indefinite leave of absence. A former colleague told a reporter off the record he thought he was untouchable. Turns out he just hadn't met someone unafraid. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed quiet. No press conferences, no interviews. She returned to her district, visiting schools, meeting with community leaders, walking the same streets she always had. But everywhere she went, people stopped her, handshakes, tears, gratitude. "You made us proud," they said. "You made them listen." On the steps of a community center one evening, a teenage girl approached her, phone in hand. "Can I show you something?" she asked, nervous. The screen played a video compilation, clips of women from across the country, each repeating Jasmine's words, "I won't apologize for being loud." Teachers, nurses, students, single mothers, all saying it like an oath. Jasmine watched quietly, her eyes glistening. When the video ended, she simply said, "That's why I did it." But beneath the celebration, a deeper current was forming. Editorials debated what her confrontation meant for the system itself. The New York Ledger wrote, "If truth can only survive in viral moments, what does that say about justice?" Others argued it was exactly what the nation needed, a shock to the conscience, a reminder that democracy breathes through defiance. The White House released a cautious statement. "We commend the courage shown by all public servants committed to transparency and integrity." Translation: they were watching too. Even late-night hosts joined in. One joked, Jasmine Crockett didn't drop the mic. She made the mic file for witness protection. The audience roared. But the laughter, the applause, the trending hashtags, all of it couldn't mask what Jasmine herself knew deep down, that moments like this came with consequences. The higher the light burned, the darker the shadows that followed. Powerful interests don't forget being humiliated. Still, something irreversible had shifted. Across the nation, people began speaking differently about justice, not as an abstract idea, but as a living thing, bruised but breathing. Law students requested to intern with Jasmine's office. Community organizers cited her speech in rallies. Teachers played her clip in civics classes, asking their students, "What would you have said if it were you?" History, it seemed, had found its next chapter, and it had her fingerprints all over it. As night fell over the Capitol, the city lights flickered against the marble facades like candle flames, fragile, flickering, but alive. Somewhere in the quiet of her apartment, Jasmine sat by the window, watching the world react. The streets below hummed with cars, with chants still echoing faintly from the courthouse steps. She leaned forward, resting her hand against the cool glass, and whispered, "Let them talk," because she knew talk was only the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the firestorm began to settle into something quieter, something deeper. The headlines faded, the hashtags slowed, but what remained was not silence. It was resonance. People weren't just talking about Jasmine Crockett anymore. They were thinking about her. About what she had said, about what it meant. In a live interview weeks later, the host asked her softly, "Congresswoman, when you stood up to that system, when you risked your career, what were you thinking?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "I wasn't thinking about power," she said. "I was thinking about truth. Power can survive without truth, but truth can't survive without courage." That line, delivered gently, without fanfare, became the defining quote of her career. It was replayed on screens and shared in classrooms, etched onto posters and memes, but most importantly, it settled into the public's conscience like a seed. Because beneath all the noise, people began to see the lesson she had lived. That dignity isn't weakness, that morality isn't naivete, and that sometimes the loudest revolution is the calm insistence on honesty. The nation, so often divided by noise, paused for a rare moment of introspection. Commentators called it the Crockett effect. Churches quoted her sermon-like cadence. Even skeptics who had once dismissed her found themselves disarmed by the consistency of her message. She never gloated. She never claimed victory. She simply reminded everyone that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground. Judge Richard Leon, when asked later about that day in court, said something unexpected. "I've presided over hundreds of hearings," he told a journalist. "But that was different. It wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about moral gravity. The room didn't fall silent because of authority. It fell silent because, for once, it recognized conscience." That reflection rippled far beyond Washington. In community halls and university auditoriums, people quoted her closing words like a mantra. Integrity is not a strategy. It's a stand. She became a symbol not because she won, but because she stood. And in a world where standing for anything had become risky, that meant something. But Jasmine refused to become a statue. "Symbols don't change systems," she said at a town hall meeting. "People do." Her tone was firm but hopeful. "Don't wait for someone like me to speak truth for you. Every person here has a moment where silence feels safer. That's the moment truth needs you most." The audience rose to their feet, not in applause, but in understanding. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was ownership. She had taken a courtroom moment and turned it into a call for personal courage. Outside, the evening air was soft, golden with the first light of dusk. A mural across the street showed her now familiar silhouette. Head high, shoulders squared. But beneath it, someone had scrawled new words in bold paint. "The truth needs no permission." Jasmine stopped when she saw it. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled. The kind of quiet smile that carries the weight of storms survived. In that stillness, it was clear. This story had never been about a courtroom or a clash of egos. It was about something older, something enduring. The unbreakable thread between truth and those brave enough to speak it. And as she walked away from the mural, the camera would have caught a final image worthy of every headline. Her figure fading into the golden light, leaving behind a message not of victory, but of vision. Because, in the end, Jasmine Crockett's story wasn't about defeating an opponent. It was about reminding a country that justice is not found in judgment. It's found in courage. In a world that too often rewards noise over truth, Jasmine Crockett reminded us what real power looks like. The power to stay calm when others shout, to stand tall when the ground shakes, to speak truth even when it costs you comfort. Her story wasn't just about one courtroom, one clash, or one viral moment. It was about the kind of courage that outlives the moment, the kind that lights fires in others, because justice isn't a headline. It's a heartbeat, carried by every person who refuses to back down, who believes that integrity still matters, that truth still belongs to the people. So if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't just scroll away. Stand for something. Speak up when silence feels easier. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that doing what's right will always matter more than doing what's safe. Leave your thoughts below. Tell us, what does standing for truth look like in your life? Because this channel, this community, isn't just here to tell stories. It's here to build them, to give voice to the moments that remind us we're not powerless, just waiting for the right moment to rise. And if you believe that moment is now, hit that like button. Subscribe and join a movement built on courage, not comfort, because the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs people brave enough to carry it forward. This isn't the end of Jasmine Crockett's story. It's the beginning of ours.